Welcome, everyone, to another new teaching show. I'm joined by my intrepid co host, Dale Tobin, Laura Massey, and once again, we are joined by the Paranormal Rangers, Jonathan Stan and Michelle. Welcome to the show, guys. How you all doing today?
Doing well.
Wonderful.
Really good.
So we've had a variety of conversations, and a whole lot of people have really enjoyed our conversations on the paranormal topics. And today we're going to jump right into the long walk, and that's the Navajo's forced walk during their time where they were sent to the reservation. And we're going to talk about some of the paranormal experiences that happen when large volumes of people go through a violent death and what that energy means. And we're going to start our paranormal talks from there. We really encourage everybody to come on here and hit the like and subscribe button. We're always open to questions, so go down into the comment section or go on into the live chat section here and interact with us when it comes to these paranormal topics. So, Stan and Jonathan, what exactly is the long walk for those that aren't fully familiar with it?
Well, I guess I'll tackle this one from a historical standpoint, and understand that there are two versions of this story. So I'll give you the official version first. That's taught in the schools, and that's that the Navajos were raiding and stealing livestock and everything else. And so the military was called in to basically round them up and encamp them for a time until this could be taken care of. And so that's what history, as it's taught today, teaches us. Uh, there is another version of this that has come to light more recently, and that's that 1864 and 1863, gold had just been discovered in Prescott, Arizona. And the gold created another gold rush, just like the Black Hills and California gold rush. So you had a lot of people getting very excited and moving to that location to get rich. What happens is that a military assayer going through the Navajo reservation looked at the limestone and sandstone formations and said, there's gold out there. And so the government had to come up with a reason to displace the Navajos from their land in order to search for gold. They did. They did the roundup. They got the U.S. military with Kit Carson to come in, and they basically used the same tactics that they used on Sherman's March to the Sea, which is just completely destroy the infrastructure. Don't give your enemy anywhere to live, anywhere to raise crops, burn everything. And that's what they did. And they rounded up the Navajos and force marched them. Well, they encamped them first between Fort Defiance and the New Mexico state line. Then after that, they force marched them in 4 different groups, from what we understand, on 4 different trails. One of them actually went through Santa Fe, New Mexico, where the captives were paraded down the main street. So there were a lot of people that died during the march. After several years of looking, the military found out that limestone and sandstone do not carry gold deposits, but that granite does. And so that venture was stopped. and there was a treaty that was offered in 1868. So they were in camp for a period of 4 years. Um, During that time, they even had cases where coffee beans were issued as commodities along with flour and salt and baking soda and things like that. And the Navajos didn't know what coffee beans were, so they boiled them and ate them. And a lot of them died because of that, because coffee beans are poisonous if you don't know how to brew them. So a lot of people died along the way. A lot of women were raped and murdered. A lot of young girls the same. Um, it was just a really horrible time. People were killed out of hand because they couldn't keep up. Um, so it was bad. It wasn't just this little picnic walk to another location. It was almost 300 miles. So there was a lot of trials and tribulation along the way. A lot of people were killed trying to escape from the initial point where they were encamped, and so there was a lot of death right in that area that is now in the area of Sabonito and Window Rock.
So how many died roughly on that long walk?
You know, I don't have the exact numbers. Stan, maybe you can speak to the numbers.
I do know they estimate that 10,000 Navajos were force marched. There were some that went into hiding in different areas on the reservation and on the outlying area of the reservation. As far as the figures that were deceased, I know it's several thousand.
Wow.
And a whole bunch of other stuff was going on in general Southwest history at that time. You had the expansion into Texas. You had Texas Rangers, the Comanche, all sorts of other tribes also in the different throes of dealing with that. The Long Walk was for the Navajo. The Trail of Tears is for the others. Example, refugee trains have been done throughout war's history. Now let's look at the paranormal effects of the loss of so much life. And what have you guys in your investigation run across when dealing with, the long walk or any of the aspects of the large losses of life?
One of the things is that um, with the Navajo, that is in and around the time of the Civil War, and as John mentioned, the way the Navajos were forced removed, they did employ the soldiers that were assigned to move the Navajo did employ what is called a scorched earth campaign, where not only are the hogans or homes burned, the gardens are destroyed, the livestock are killed, even 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 like fruit trees are destroyed. And water sources are contaminated. So it was for the Navajo even to be able to return home after 1868. What they returned home to was really nothing, because what they knew is their livelihood before the long walk. All of that was gone. All of that was gone. The other thing is, as they were marched from the current reservation area, like John said, many women were raped and girls were raped and killed. Elderly, they were also killed. The soldiers at times would bayonet the Navajos simply to save ammunition. So I know that areas like what you have today, let's say at Gettysburg, you look at the amount of loss of life in Gettysburg, which is a huge figure. That loss of life within that small land area lends and ends up where you have a lot of spirit activity even to this very day. And that's no different from the area of Winter Rock, where you had Navajos that were encamped in and before they were taken out to Fort Wingate and then further marched to the east. So yeah, all of those areas today, like the Capitol, all of the older BIA buildings, almost all of them, I would say, have some type of paranormal activity within those spaces.
Have you done any investigations on those?
I actually worked in that area, so I had conducted investigations over the years, and some of those cases were really intense as far as the level of activity within the investigation. And matter of fact, speaking of the Civil War era and the cavalry soldiers that forced marched the Navajos, there has been sightings of spirits that are still in period dress from the 1800s, these soldiers. And matter of fact, I personally have witnessed this at one of the office spaces there in Winter Rock. So,
Wow, that's amazing. It's like being on the Civil War battlefields and seeing the troops come in through the mist of fog of the early mornings.
yeah.
Yeah, it's seen all the time.
Andrew, it's really interesting. There's another I guess a connotation of, it's called the Bosque Redondo. So there's one in the same with the Long Walk. The Bosque Redondo it's known for the name of the Long Walk as well. And when they went to Fort Sumner to their concentration camps, the Navajos were starved, as these gentlemen have indicated. But the really amazing thing after 1868 is we were able to come back and replenish our sheep and our lands. And once again, we grew to a quantity of being the people we are. We resolved the conflict. It wasn't spoken about, but as far as the paranormal, we look them as our ancient ancestors, that they're there to help us and guide us. And so when we have these experiences with the paranormal on the reservation or in those areas, it's because we feel like our ancestors are there in our behalf.
And a great deal of collective trauma as well. It's residual from all that.
Mm-hmm.
True.
With the Navajo Nation. I know the other nations as well, but with the Navajo.
Is a long walk taught in schools much in America, in like elementary schools? Is it something taught to the children around, or no? Is it yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
And have they ever reported accurately the deaths as well? I wonder.
I know on the Navajo reservation, their children, there is reference to the Long Walk and Bosque Redondo, but it doesn't go into the in depth of the truth of what occurred. I mean, John can elaborate more on relatives he's had that were on that Long Walk, but it was very traumatic, and yeah, a lot of people that did come home, they came home without some of their family members that were lost on that Long Walk. So it was a very traumatizing time. I liken it to the Holocaust with the Jewish people persecuted by the Nazis in Germany. To me, these peoples, like these two groups, are like what John had mentioned. The Navajos were treated in this way simply because of the pursuit of gold, and so yeah, it's a very traumatic time.
So you said this long walk was 600 miles. How long did it go on for? Like, how long did this go on for, this long walk altogether, in a period of time?
It went from 1864, and they were encamped until the treaty was signed in 1868.
Wow.
But I
So,
guess even with the signing of the treaty, it didn't stop the persecution in some ways, did it?
no, that you have to understand that in those days there was a systematic genocide taking place with Indian tribes in the United States. Today, we have, you know, what, 574 recognized Indian tribes in the United States. There were probably more than 3,000 tribes before, and they were all decimated. Um, we look at Anglo history, and one of the things that we see is that they celebrate Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving actually came about as the result of the massacre of an Indian village, and on the East Coast. And when the Indians were killed there, the settlers celebrated and had Thanksgiving because they killed Indians. We look at our leaders like Abraham Lincoln. Oh, he was so great, He hung 48 Native Americans in one mass hanging one day, and had the ability to stop that and did not, and ordered it actually. So we have things like that going on in the background. You have guys like a Methodist minister named Colonel John Shivington, who commanded the 2nd Colorado Volunteers. And as they're riding into Sand Creek, he tells his troops, "Nits make lice, kill them all."
Mm-hmm.
And the village was mainly composed of old men, women, and children. And they went in and they basically butchered 200 people. So, this is the background of that time. You have in the Pacific Northwest, you actually had bounties on Indian scalps. Didn't matter if they're a man, woman, child, you were paid the same for whatever scalps you brought in. And it was basically a license to go out and hunt Native Americans and kill them. So this is happening all across the United States. And Indians are being rounded up. They're being put on reservations, which the U.S. government deemed property that was no good for anything. And so they're put there. And yet they, I like to say that we survived all that. And, we came out, and now we have, believe it or not, Indian nations today are sovereign. When you go onto an Indian reservation, it's like you're going into a whole nother country within the United States. And so it's a really interesting phenomenon that takes place now.
So butchery and scumbaggery, like a person in the chat room said, was common in the 1500s to the 1900s. You can go back to the Roman era where they forced marched millions of barbarians or a variety of things. We see this repeated throughout history. But the unique aspect of what was done to the Native Americans, it was done during the industrialization process, where the
Mhm.
gun began to wear in the West, and the bow and arrow was no longer faster than what the gun could do. The muskets of the old time and the rapid industrialization, faster than a people could be produced, and the influx of cultures from around the world, from Ireland, Germany, etc., being told there was free land for them. And many of them were religiously persecuted. They landed in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or in Texas and Galveston, and they came with oxes, animals that could never survive, the territories that they were going to. And then you have the classic 1860s, the end of the Civil War, and then the Americans attempt to get back into into the to dealing with the native issues and and all the all the things that were going on there. But the butchery got worse, didn't it? Okay,
Well,
butchery
Indeed.
got
Andrew,
worse.
if
Yes.
you allow me to share this, it's an interesting thing. I had a friend from the University of California give me a map. Now, you can't see this, but this used to be our nations across the United North America up into Canada. And
You got to turn off your background for us to see it.
okay, sorry about that. Can you see that now?
You still have to turn off your background.
Okay, let me put that in there. But anyways, talking about that, we had over 5,000 tribes in the United States at one time. And so we talked about annihilation, extinction of Native Americans across the board, for many, many, many centuries. And I just returned from the Dominica Republic and talked with some individuals about their country. The obliteration of the Taino tribe completely wiped out. So that's what's been occurring throughout our history. And, we're talking about a segment here of the Bosque Redondo, the Long Walk, just a short term. And in short time, we as a people can be obliterated. And I think, like you were saying, the traumas, the heinous acts against Native Americans, we were supposed to be wiped out, but we survived. We are strong people. The Navajos, the remaining tribes that are here, the 550 tribes that are here today, are strong, and we're not going to be obliterated. And we're taking back our lands. I had this discussion with somebody from Canada while I was on my trip. And they're going through a reformation right now in their government, where they're now having to give back the lands back to the Native Americans and apologize for the heinous acts that have been going on in their country. And we're getting the same thing. And so that tells us even today we're still dealing with the past. And so I think our ancestors are there with us in a paranormal sense and a spiritual sense to help us along. Because today we're all living together and we're intermixed, and we need to bring about teaching the traditions of our nations. And I'm just letting you know that I'm not on a rant. I'm just basically saying that this has happened, and now we're coming to a healthier time in our nation's history.
And by you doing that, you're providing great healing for your ancestors. Is that how you feel?
Yeah, I do. I think we have ancestral traumas. I think we are, just even talking about it. The Navajos for a very long time shared orally amongst themselves the trauma of what happened to them, but they never shared it with the world. And I'm going to not promote my grandmother's book, but after the Bosque Redondo, she does, here again, I got to turn off my background. It's called Caba, the recollection of a Navajo childhood. She took that history from the time the Long Walk occurred as to what Native American life on the Navajo reservation was, where it was going into the future. And I'm really glad I have that collection in my library so that I can share that with my kids and so on and so forth. And she wanted to share that with the world. This is my grandmother. So It was very, very, very interesting to find out how the Navajo endured going onwards and keeping their traditions and their heritage and mostly their language. Because today we are losing our language because it's not being taught.
Yeah, on my side, you talk about generational trauma. My great grandmother was Navajo on the Navajo side. And she, as a child, was taken to Bosque Redondo and survived that march. She escaped. They said that she was probably 8 or 9 years old, and she escaped from the camp there. Now, the alarms went off. The military was searching for her. The settlers were told that there was a reward for anybody that would capture an escapee. There were Mexican slavers that were looking for any loose people that they could enslave and take back to Mexico. There were Ute Indians that were providing scouts for the military that were actively searching the area. So, talk about having a target on your back. She made it all the way home and back to where she came from. Now, the interesting thing about this is that my mother is not Navajo. She's what they used to call Kiowa Apache, which is Apache tribe of Oklahoma now, and Cheyenne. And when she met my father, who's part Navajo, they went up to the cabin up in New Mexico, and the family met her, and they immediately put her down and said, well, she's not Navajo. What are you doing with a non-Navajo woman, And they're really giving her a hard time. And the grandmother or the great-grandmother told them, you leave her alone. Her people are good people. They helped me when I escaped. And we think that the languages for the Apache tribe of Oklahoma is Athabascan based, which is what the Navajos speak. And so Navajos, Apaches, they all kind of speak a similar language. And so we think that a hunting party probably picked her up along the way and kept them with them, And so after she told the family that, in those days, you did not talk back to your elders. They would literally take a stick to you and show you who's boss. So in those days, her word was gold. And after that, the family accepted her, and that's how my dad and my mom got together. Now, an aside story to that, my father was involved as a child actor with Hollywood productions. And if you look at a Jimmy Stewart, Deborah pageant movie called Broken Arrow back in, early 50s, you'll see a young Indian boy that supposedly got shot in the back, stumbling through the brush and falls down, and Jimmy Stewart nurses him back to health, and that's how the movie starts. Well, that little boy was my dad. And so
Wow.
we used to accuse him all the time of overacting. But every time he'd have a bit part in a movie, he'd go home to New Mexico and tell everybody, hey, you got to go see the movie, And I think it was Cheyenne Autumn. He took them to see in Gallup and at the movie theater there. And they said that partway through that movie theater, they showed a scene of Navajos walking. Well, it's supposed to be Cheyennes, right? But of course, the Cheyennes are all speaking in Navajo because that's the actors that they picked up, and they were singing as they were walking along in these long columns. And my great grandmother got up and left the theater, and never said a word to anybody. Just got up and walked out. When she was questioned later on, she said that those songs that they were singing in that movie were the same songs they sung on the long walk. And she just couldn't take that and had to get up and leave. So there is that trauma that still exists deep down with every Navajo. I'm also a direct descendant of Chief White Antelope from the Sand Creek Massacre. And so, yeah, there's trauma all over the place. Depending on which way you turn, every tribe has it.
Mm-hmm.
So
Jonathan, Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to quickly ask, so for the Navajo language, is this still being taught today then to the future generations? For them to, what's it like around your area being taught?
The Navajo language is in some schools being taught.
Yes.
However, you have to understand that after the Navajos came back, part of the treaty said that they would send their kids to boarding schools.
Uh-huh.
This was a government plan at what they called assimilation. The idea was that if you sent the kids and took the Indian out of them, washed their mouths out with lye soap every time they spoke their language or beat them, and taught them to hoard things and collect things, you were going to be basically changed into an Anglo, and you would lose your culture, and you would intermarry outside of the reservation, and no longer that tribe would cease to exist. So this was the great plan. And they shipped students all the way to Pennsylvania. And now we're finding out today that there's massive graveyards that are being discovered in Canada and in the States of children that were either murdered due to sexual things, or just died because of disease, or even in some cases heartbreak. And as a kind of a humorous thing, I really wondered when we defeated Iraq in the last war that we had, I was waiting for them to recruit all the BIA teachers and send them to Iraq and set up boarding schools over there. And already got the system set up, and they could house the teachers in substandard housing and create boarding schools that were, where the kids were beaten until they lost their language. And so I used to laugh about that, thinking about, wow, this is almost the same thing, but they didn't do that.
I did attend a junior college in Kansas, 89 through 90. And one of the things that occurred with me was that, so Haskell, at that time it was an Indian junior college, it had been used as one of these institutions like what John's talking about, one of these more or less what evolved into a boarding school. There'd be children on the different reservations. There would be agents that would come out and actually, really, they're just kidnapping children. They're not asking the parents, getting their permission. They're just basically, when they encountered a child, the child was taken and later shipped, I would imagine by train and other means, to these institutions, usually further away, like the one they had in Kansas. So my experience was that I was living in one of the dorms at the time, and one night I ended up waking up, and I was sitting in one of those graveyards that's adjacent to the college. And so I didn't know how I got there. Um, all I know, I was sitting in that graveyard, and there was an overwhelming sense of sadness that I experienced. I went down through that row of all of the headstones of the little children, and some of them you could still read their names, and I would, each one of them. And I went down through there, and I would say a prayer to each of those children. But that experience was really, really kind of life changing, because it really impacted me on an emotional level. So
Do you think, guys, that and Michelle, obviously, that because so many of your ancestors died in such sadness, such grief, do they have a problem passing on? Do you think some hang around, so because of the way that they died, because of the
Traumas.
brutality, and the traumas related to their death?
Well,
I
Laura,
think not only
oh, go ahead, Stan.
I think not only with the reservations, but that can happen anywhere where you have, let's say, vehicle accidents or homicides, or anytime there is trauma involved in that person's death. A lot of times that spirit activity is the result of that. So yeah, I think that when natives have died in a very traumatic and very you know, a situation where, just like what John said, a lot of these children died because of sadness. They were kidnapped ultimately and held captive and forced to meet the demands of that institution. And the other thing at that time was there was a lot of different pandemics, like what we're experiencing today with COVID. And when a child would get sick with pneumonia and that kind of thing, they would simply lose the will to live, and out of sadness, and they would succumb to it. So yeah.
And do you think, as paranormal rangers, that almost collective grief, like you were talking about your experience in the graveyard, that you pick up on particularly because these are your ancestors?
I think we do. I think we do.
We're part
Laura,
of the
if you
greater
allow me
purpose.
to share this experience, I shared this with Stan. I recently went up to Idaho, and we were on the interstate, and my GPS, and it was heavy rains, snowstorm, excuse me, that we were going through, and I had fallen asleep in the passenger side, and when I awoke, we were in a very remote area, and I asked the driver, I said, "Where are we at? I don't know. Your GPS took us here." And where we found ourselves was on the truck highway. I told Stan about this story, on a Highway 12, and it was complete whiteout. And what was really interesting, we were right next to the Columbia River. And for a few moments there, I felt like I was taken back in history, because that was the Lewis and Clark Trail, and Sacagawea was with them. And for a moment, I thought, that's interesting that I would be having this mind thought about Sacagawea. And I felt, and then the clouds lifted up and the fog lifted up. I could see Washington. The river is quite large and very deep. And for a moment there, I felt like I was taken back in history to remember her. So while I was in the car and we were trying to ferret our way through the snowstorm, trying to get back on the interstate, I just had this recollection is our ancestors, not just our tribal ancestors, but ancestors from all tribes and nations, famous ones, whatever, they want us to remember it. So for me, I thought it was a recollection of, you need to remember our people yourself.
Right.
And so when I shared this with Stan, similar to his graveyard, waking up, not knowing where you're at, and then, coming to find out you're having a connection to that type of historical spirit and remembering. And I think it's not the trauma of her situation. Hers became a very famous journey, but so is the long walk is a famous journey. All of our ancestors were a part of that long walk. And I belong to other tribes that had their own tragedies as well that I've not talked about. But today, I think we have the ability to heal that trauma. And I've done some of that through native means and traditions and such, clear out that spirit. And we have those traditions.
The irony of what you said, it was during a snowstorm, and as it was beginning to clear, the thinning of the veil, you were able to tap into the wisdom that's within your DNA that opened up your mystical moment of introspection. Introspection about what is, was, and could be, and how that interacted with you. Mystical experiences like that have been happening to humans since the dawns of humans' birth. But the irony of it happening in the ancestral lands, on a moment where your sat nav took you the wrong way. So was your sat nav taken over by the ancestors? I would believe it was. You had to go there, have that experience.
I do know spirit can definitely affect electronics, digital equipment. In some of the investigations I've had, there is a direct manipulation by spirit of electronic devices. So I just wanted to comment there on that. The other thing is, I can't make a trip from here on the Navajo reservation to Albuquerque and back. I can't make that trip without thinking about the Navajos that made that walk. I just can't do it. Every single time I make that trip, I can only ponder the people that travel that corridor on foot.
Is your remembrance and honoring of them so that they're not lost to the veils of history? In your own way?
I usually say a prayer, every time that I go through there and I experience that sixth sense that John and I have developed, and I know Michelle has that too, over the years. So, yeah.
Stan, have you had experiences like that too?
You mean John?
John, sorry. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I was going to bring up is that we have to look at history, because if there's mistakes that are made and you don't look back at them, you will make the same mistakes again over and over and over. And I liken it to somebody who's plowing a field with a plow. You have to look back in order to keep a straight line in front. Otherwise, your whole row will be crooked. And so we should look back at history. We should accept the lessons that were gained through trauma and hard lives, and strive to be better, strive to do better. And that's what we do with that, is we take those lessons and we try to be better.
Yeah,
why-
I mean, it must be, sorry, Stan, it must be very important for your ancestors that you do remember.
Well, we're taught to learn from our mistakes, especially, our elders and their guidance. They want to try to give us the knowledge and tools that that the mistakes they've made, we learn from that, and we try to avoid that kind of thing. You look at the political discord in this country at this time, and we've already been here before, and we should be trying to avoid those same mistakes today. I mean, we've got to, we're given the ability to think, and understand, and at times we need to compromise. We can't always have it our way, our way, our way all the time. It's a matter of compromising. And you look at in history the traumas that have occurred in this country in the past, and it just seems like instead of standing as Americans all together and supporting each other, we're pulling each other apart. And these other countries that are enemies to the United States, they're laughing and they're enjoying this. They're looking at America, and because if something did happen in this country, a major conflict, they're going to swoop in, and they're going to, because we're vulnerable, they're going to take advantage of that. And we're not seeing that right now, and it's a shame. We're all Americans. This country was founded as, from with the Constitution and stuff, that we were a melting pot of peoples. That was one of the major premises. So we need to be supporting each other instead of fighting and all of that stuff.
Something is to be said about the melting pot. Canada is not as much as the melting pot of the United States. Canada has a whole different journey of immigration versus the United States. You have the East Coast, the Irish, the French, the German, the Prussian, the Italian, the Greek, the Middle Eastern, from the late 1700s into the early 1900s, and then just around Prohibition's turnaround, where there was a slowing of the immigration to America, and many left America. Then you have the West Coast, where all the Pacific Asian communities who went through their own terrible times in their own countries to come here as indebted slaves. We are that melting pot. And as it gets more and more refined as a melting pot, it's hard to tell us apart. And like you said, we're all Americans, founded under an ideology of a constitution that gives every man, woman, and child unalienable rights.
Right.
For as much as we may say about America now, it is still the only country in the world that has that in its constitution.
Right.
Think about that. There's still only one country in the whole world that gives you the unalienable rights. It's free speech, bear arms, etc., etc., etc. All of those things. There are no other countries that do that. And there's a reason why.
Right.
There's a big reason why. The power is still in the people.
Yeah, we also have to be clear that, they say that people originally came here to escape religious persecution. And this was a political move by their governments that said, you have to be this. You have to be in this religion. And in some cases, like in Spain, you had the Spanish Inquisition, where they said, you have to be in this religion or we will kill you.
Right.
But before we kill you, we'll torture you until you confess.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this background going on, and understand that America really is not, I should say the United States, is not an actual melting pot as we think of it. The United States is a stew pot.
A stew pot, even better way to describe it. Yes.
You can go and find communities of Armenians, communities of Vietnamese, communities of Italians and Germans and everything else. You go in there and you think, oh my God, I went to Germany.
Mhm.
And it's just like that all across the United States. And this is why assimilation did not work, because Native Americans just, wouldn't allow it. But, getting into this idea of religion, a lot of people today say, well, America was built on Christianity. It really wasn't. There was one or two people that signed the Constitution that would be today considered Christian evangelicals. They were deists. Ben Franklin was a deist. There were others that were Lutheran, that were Episcopalian. And, I had this conversation recently where we were talking about this idea that if you don't belong to a particular religion, within that religion, you could be called a heretic and killed. And then you get into these branches of, different councils of this and different, leaderships of that. And, where these groups just splinter off into so many different splinters, and each one is competing with the other one. So, it just goes on and on and on. So the United States, when the Constitution came out, was not based in any way on religion. In fact, they debated that quite a bit.
Yep.
And they turned it down. They said, we will not include religion. So people say, well, why do we have In God We Trust? Why do we say one nation under God in the Pledge of Allegiance? One nation under God was actually incorporated into the Pledge of Allegiance in 1950s by Dwight Eisenhower when the communist menace came up. And so they decided to amend that and include it. It's not. So I see a lot of politics today where they're saying, oh, we need to get back to a Christian fundamentalist. No, the United States allowed for freedom of religion to the point that you can be in the Church of Satan and not be persecuted for it, or you can be agnostic or a sectic. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox, but that's...
Hey, John, can I ask you to talk about the different churches and how that was set up at the time of assimilation when the tribes, when the Navajos came back from the Long Walk, and how that was done?
Yeah, believe it or not, there early on in the early 1800s, there was councils. Even before that, there were councils that were set up, and the United States was divided up into spheres of influence by religious leaders. So the Pueblo tribes were given to the Catholics. Some of the Navajos were a combination of Mormons and Christian Reformed. And on and on, Episcopalians, Methodists, everybody had their little section carved out for them where they would have religious supremacy within those areas. And they were allowed to send people in, whereas others were discouraged. So, with the Catholicism, when the Spanish first came to the Pueblos, they wiped out everybody that was against them and said, you either become a Catholic or you die. And so you had the Pueblo Revolt, where for almost 100 years, nobody came back because they killed a bunch of people. Um, but yeah, and a lot of them would say, "Yeah, I'll be Catholic just to placate you and get baptized," and but they practice their native religion in secret, and so this created distrust, and so Indians have ever since then been distrusted. In fact, in Christianity today, Native Americans are told that if you want to be a Christian, if you want to be born again, you have to step away from your culture and abandon it in order to be a Christian.
You
Yet
got to
church,
join the cult. You got to join the cult.
yeah, and I've had a lot of arguments with church members, because I go dance in powwows, and they tell me,
Mhm.
"Oh, that's sinful. You shouldn't go there. That's the devil's playground." And I tell them, it's gathering of people like yourselves to celebrate together. And
Ron, talk about the ghost dances that were obliterated out of the culture because they saw that as a threat.
Exactly.
yeah, the ghost dance came out with the idea that it would return everything back to what it used to be. The Cheyennes actually sent people toward the West Coast to Nevada to find out who had invented the ghost dance and what it meant and if it was any good, and come back and report. And they basically said, no, this isn't going to change anything. But the government looked at it as, oh, they're doing a war dance. They're going to go on the war path again. And so they decided, let's put it down. And that's how Wounded Knee came about. That everybody was killed there because they were uh, doing a ghost dance. Um, so there's a whole backstory concerning all these things um, that gets much more detailed into the backgrounds of the powwow, how those came about, how but the government was afraid of Indians, of Native Americans. They were so afraid that today in the military, when you go into enemy lines, it's referred to as going into Indian country. When Osama bin Laden was killed, they used the code word Geronimo because Geronimo was so feared as a fighter. He was so feared that our paratroopers in World War II yelled Geronimo as they jumped out of the airplanes. So, you have this disrespect that still goes on today. And, you know, um, every native that goes into the military, they're immediately, oh, you must be a warrior. We do grow up in a warrior society, but not just like any society, not all people are warriors.
John, speaking of Geronimo, I was told of a story that his tribe had very mystical gifts. And one of the things he was bestowed upon was a blanket. And he was able to take and protect his people for a short time with this blanket. And where this blanket took him were two other dimensions. And so this blanket is the story of the blanket he had was stolen from him in modern days. It was a collection. It was handed down secretly, and then eventually we heard about that he was killed in battle. But this blanket and this tool he possessed, somebody had it. They were showing it, and because somebody wanted it so bad, they stole it. So to the day, it is lost relic. So I think when you talk about the fear of the Native Americans, I think there are mystical gifts that occur and are still with us today that are misunderstood. And they are not evil. They were things to help others and to interact with the paranormal world, as we would say, or the mystical world of our own tribes. I think we still have that today.
Yeah, and then one of the things that also happens is that a lot of these tribes in the United States, they do not speak the same languages. Some of them are hereditary enemies, just like France and Germany, that are enemies from way, way back into the Dark Ages. The government would pit tribes against each other and create divisions among them. Tribes were pretty much left on their own when they were separated. Before, my great grandmother, she could speak 7 different languages. If you go to Europe, people over there speak different languages. They speak German, they speak French, they speak all these other, national language, Spanish. And yet we say, oh, gotta speak American here. So there wasn't a coordinated effort. And when there was, when you had tribes like the different Sioux nations, the different, the Cheyennes, the Arapahoes, the Kiowas, the Comanches, all getting together and showing up at the Battle of the Greasy Grass, which is known as Custer's Last Stand. Then you saw Native Americans actually coordinated. But before that, they would pretty much pick them off by themselves. And, it was just as that's how the times were. And understand that the government, in dealing with tribes, did not know the difference between Indian tribes. So when you had stuff going on along the Arkansas River, where raids were taking place, the government would attack any Indians that were in that area, even though they were friendly. Sand Creek is a good portrayal of this, because the natives there went to the governor of Colorado and said, where can we camp? We're friendly. Chief White Antelope and Black Kettle had both met the President of the United States and received peace medals and received a garrison flag that they said was big enough to cover a wagon. And they were told, go camp at Sand Creek, raise an American flag above your village with a white flag underneath it, so we'll know you're friendly. And Shivington still attacked it and killed everybody. And White Antelope died under an American flag. So, they just didn't differentiate that, oh, this was Sioux that made this raiding party, or that this was a different tribe. They just said, oh, they're all brown skinned, so let's kill them.
Well, they had no honor, did they? Which is something that the Navajo and the other nations could teach them about honor.
Well, they were ignorant, and
Yeah.
and ignorant in the truest sense of the word. They just didn't know, and nobody was taking the time to learn. You had Indian agents that knew the difference and would tell the military, these are not the people, these are not the droids you're looking for. But, they just ignored the advice.
Because ultimately they didn't care.
They didn't care. And here's the thing that's really interesting. As I pointed out earlier, we had 5,000 tribes across the United States, North America, South America, and up into Canada. And the thing you've got to remember too is now archaeologically they're finding bones all over the United States that have been buried. When you focus off and isolate tribes from their very purpose, and their very purpose was agriculture and sustainability of, green. And then you're over there and you're having to focus on disease, and we're losing our ways, our language. That's the liberation nations. And what was really interesting of the Europeans coming over and knowing, and religious orders coming over and knowing that they're taking our fertile lands away. They're giving us the worst lands. But there was a question here is, why couldn't the natives fight back? Because we were so focused on taking care of ourselves to keep survival rates going, to intermarry within the bloodline. Our focus was not on fighting back. We were losing, and they knew how to treat smallpox and blankets. They were giving us things that were killing us. So today we are fighting back through the courts. And we are getting back our ancestral lands, and we're having to take responsibility as modern day Native Americans to fight back. And I'm sorry, we're not fighting with weapons, we're fighting with the court system, and we're winning. And people don't report that we are getting back our ancestral lines. I mean, Muskogee got half of Oklahoma back this last year, and that was a win. But but that nation will abide by the federal government and the state government constitutions. So yeah, things are changing for the natives, but we're still having the backlash of taking responsibility. And I think when Stan and I and Jonathan have these spiritual moments where we're being taken back into to remembering our ancestry and where we came from and where we are today, this is one of those. Today, what we're doing here is Paranormal Rangers explaining to the audience that we're trying to share the story of our history, of ourselves, the ancestral lines, that DNA lines that we come from very powerful ancestries. I mean, the stories I've heard from Stan and John's, ancestral lines. My ancestral line is very powerful with what my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, the things, how they incorporated into the non-native world and were able to accomplish, I mean, in everything, entertainment, authorship. And, Stan's one of those, writing his experiences of being a paranormal ranger. We have adapted, and we are now out there teaching, and I don't know the language. I have tried. I didn't grow up with the language. I didn't grow up with all the traditions, but with sharing, it is a reminder that, my ancestors are still helping along because we're interacting with each other. So we talk about, the stew pot, we're hearing about all the wars going on, outside the United States. And, the COVID was a perfect example of this during the pandemic, trying to isolate all of us. And there was Antifa. I mean, I don't want to get into political things, but, we were seeing this across the board, and the prejudice level that rose because we were so isolated from one another, and we were not coming up with solutions. We were fighting against each other, even on a political side. So, I could go on and on about this, but I'm not going to rant and rave. It's just today we have to learn how to incorporate being sane and working with one another and share knowledge and share history, because, the UK has a rich, history too. The Greeks have a history too, speaking of which, Andrew is that bloodline. So there's much we can learn from each other. And I think today's show is wonderful to talk about the history of the melting pot, stew pot, whatever you want to call it, in our nations and what's going on in our politics in the world today.
Cincinnati chili.
Mhm.
I'm in.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think what's so important about this is we're not just talking about awakening.
No.
That's one thing. We're talking about the remembering that goes with this awakening, the remembering and the honoring of what your ancestors have gone through.
Yeah, one of the things that me and Stan have always talked about and said with the idea that there are haunted locations around Window Rock, San Benito, all the way up to Fort Defiance, and other places on the reservation. we as a human are composed of energy, and energy cannot be destroyed. It can change. It can change state, but it can't be obliterated. And we started thinking that maybe, and this is just speculation on our part, we talk about the soul, the person that dies violently, that maybe some of that energy attaches to inanimate objects like rock formations and the ground and things like that. And when you get that 3 o'clock in the morning spooky hour, which is where the sun is on the opposite side of the earth, you almost have a vacuum on that part of the earth, and these energies can manifest and leak out and do all kinds of interesting things, or even appear to us. And so we, like I said, we speculate that this could be one of the reasons that there's so much of this activity that takes place. And we've seen it. Stan one time was in the hallway, and he showed me his glasses. He had these glasses that were photochromatic, and when you wear them for a long enough time, they become dark permanently in the past. And so his glasses always looked like he had brown sunglasses on. And one day he hears noise out in the hallway, and as he's out there, he nothing's there, but he used to hear a child bouncing a rubber ball and playing in the hallway. And he'd jump out there and look real quick, and nothing was there. He leaned over to pick something up off the rug or the floor in the middle. And as he leaned forward, his head went into an intensely cold place. Just like the atmosphere just right there was intensely cold. As he stood up, I don't know if you know what crazing is. You'll see it on old guitars where the lacquer finish starts checking and cracking. Yep. And it creates a really beautiful pattern on old instruments. Well, his glasses cracked on the lenses.
Wow.
And they were crazed. Wow. And he took it in to the eyeglass place, and they looked at it and they said, "We've never seen this before. It looks like you were somewhere that was really warm, and you put these things in sub-zero temperatures to get that effect." Somewhere in his collection, he still has those glasses, because we said we need to save them for our show and tell stuff. But that happened to Stan, and it just tells us that there's something more to this than meets the eye, and there's a big difference. There are people out there considered experts, considered probably PhD people, that have had no personal experiences. Everything they know about has been read in a book. And yet a lot of what we experienced firsthand ourselves. And that's what we talk about. Michelle's included in that group. She's probably had more experiences than me and Stan put together. But, it just happened to us. We do not have, in our job, we didn't go out and seek this stuff out ourselves. We had enough to deal with on our own. And what we dealt with on our own, me and Stan were talking about this the other day. Some of it is so dangerous that it can kill you. And,
Mm.
we
Quite literally kill you.
literally physically kill you.
Mhm.
Hands down. I mean, you're dead, or, what they call DRT. You're dead right there. And we've actually had TV film crews come out and say, well, can we do this? Can we do that? And we tell them, no, we're not going to do that. Or the caveat is, if you start looking for this stuff, we're calling it quits on the spot. And that's happened because we don't want to see anybody die because, they stumbled into something and have no cultural background to know what it is.
Mm.
With that said, we've got some big announcements. Your guys' website is finished. Paranormal's Rangers website. Joel, go ahead and put up the QR code link so everybody can go there. You guys have a special membership being offered also. So every month you're going to be giving a private show for those that are members, and you'll be launching your podcast next week also. We all look forward to that. John, Stan or John or Michelle, you guys wish to talk about the launch of your website at all?
Well, I'm really
for
grateful.
me, go ahead. Go ahead,
Stan and
Michelle.
I have a lot to say today. First of all, I'm so grateful for the individual who worked with us to launch this website. It took some finagling, but we are so proud of their efforts and their tenacity to work with all three of us on this website. It is a dream come true. We want to go out there and speak in behalf of our nations and about our paranormal experiences, our spiritual experiences of our lives, and to share with others, not to fear, but to understand the world around us from our Native American perspective. Go ahead, Stan.
Well, for me, this has been a long time coming. I mean, ever since, we met Andrew, and there's been so many different people that have contributed to make this website happen. So thank you to all of those people that played a role to make it happen. And thank you again to John and to Michelle in what you've contributed to this website. So, um, earlier it was mentioned the word awakening and remembrance. And I think we are at a point today in time where we need to start addressing um, things that are occurring in our world and how those things need to be addressed. We mentioned the political climate in this country, um, and so even between the three of us, we are all Native American, but each of us comes from a unique and different background, and we bring something unique and different to this whole project, and it's exciting. I think in this time where we're at, we need to start looking at the things that are going on, like the UAPs or UFOs, and the contacts, like the Miami incident and the Las Vegas incident. These things are happening in our world, and it's happening now. And so these things need to be discussed. And so I'm excited, very excited.
Yeah, for me, what I can say is that when we first began this journey, when me and Stan were doing these investigations and we were first asked to speak, we were both kind of like, really? I don't think anybody wants to listen to us. And as we went along, we did different podcasts. We did speaking all over the country. We got to go to Scotland to speak. And we remain true to our roots. We're not trying to be anybody. However, the stuff that we talk about, we're not making it up. We're not sensationalizing it. And you, the people that are out there watching this, are the ones that made this happen. And I want to thank everybody that's on there, watching our decrepit faces, that you guys are really the ones that have made us successful and will continue to make us successful.
Michelle, any last words you'd like to say about the website? Some of the
I think
future plans you guys might have for it?
Yeah, we're looking forward to announcing a huge event that's coming up in the year to come. Looking forward to announcing that next week. And really been wonderful working with you, Andrew. Been working with Stan and Jonathan. We have all encountered many obstacles that have tried to stop this venture, but we just keep as you know, whether it be people's schedules can't meet up or we gotten ill, but we ferreted it through all of this, Andrew. And thank you once again for believing in us as Paranormal Rangers and making friends of the Andrew Bartzis, show. Thank you.
Well, it's
Also,
been a
a shout out and
pleasure.
thank you to Andrew and Morgan and Joel and these people in the background. They're putting in a lot of hours to be able to contribute to this and make it work. So thank you. Dale, thank you. We appreciate everything that you guys have done to make this a success, and I think it will be a really big success.
And can I just say it's an absolute honor listening to you, and all your stories are coming from heart and experience, and it's just and that's the uniqueness of you, is just all your stories, and what you're saying is from your own personal truths and stories, and it's an honor, really. Thank you, guys. Thank you for all the times and hours of me listening to you like, what the fuck? This is crazy.
Thanks, Dale.
You're welcome, Dale.
I love Laura.
And I just want to say,
I love your spiritual aspect because there's so much more we could talk about on the shows when it comes to healing and spirit. And I appreciate your input.
Thank
Definitely.
you. Well, like Dale, there's so much honor held for you in my heart and for your ancestors. And I think the world needs to hear your story. And I think you three are the three to tell it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
Now
you.
we have another big announcement. While the Rangers website was built, we were in the background thinking, building, collecting, and putting together a 14-day Scotland bus tour that will include the Paranormal Rangers and us here at the Galactic Asturian Symmetry of Health and Two Feathers Medicine. It will be an all inclusive 14-day experience where we'll be stopping at hotels for extended periods of time, where all of us will be giving little mini speeches, conferences. We'll be in a set of two buses, and there's a very, very high potential that a camera crew will be going with us, which will be filming the pilot episode for the Paranormal Rangers. All of this is in the works. If you're interested, contact Laura. Laura, give your email.
Yeah, Laura, two feathers with the number 2 at gmail.com.
And understand this will be July 1st to the 15th,
14th.
1st to the 14th. And we have some special deals that will be coming up as we launch actually the rest of that stuff. We just had to wait for that website to get done, but we are announcing Scotland will be happening in 2024. If you're interested, contact Laura, twofeathers at gmail.com, the number 2. And we will be back tomorrow with the Friday night game stream. For all of you who are looking for a little bit of entertainment, come and join us there. Now, the Paranormal Rangers can be found at the Paranormal Rangers brand new website.
Yay!
So please go on over there, look at some of their videos, sign up for their membership, and give them some love, guys. Dale, give a way for people to get a hold of you.
So if you like any psychic surgery or soul retrieval sessions, head over to daletobin.com. I'm also going to be offering some new treatments very soon, so keep a lookout for that. And thank you again, everyone.
Thanks,
Laura?
Deb.
Thank you, Deb.
Thank you. Yeah, Laura2feathers@gmail.com. If you'd like to sit with me around the ancestral fire and connect to your ancestors, if you want a private session, please contact me.
And you guys know who I am. You go to my website, andrewbartzis.com. We have a brand new automated booking system linked up to the website if you wish to have sessions for me. We'll also be starting our level 1 and level 2 mentorship for 2024, which will begin in the beginning of April. So you have about 2 months to sign up for that. With that being said, everyone, amazing show. I look forward to many more of these conversations, whether it's history, reality. It's not always the paranormal. The truths that came out in this show were very touching, very expansive, and I look forward to many more ways of us exploring the potentials of life in the future. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank